Good morning, 5th grade. Guess what? This is your last video for history for 5th grade. And it's your last video for 5th grade forever. Isn't that exciting? You guys did it. Yay! Happy dance. Happy dance. Okay? You got through 5th grade history. Very good job, guys. All right, so today is our last recap of the Civil War. And we're going to be looking at Grant taking over the Union. We're going to be looking at Sherman's March to the Sea. Super famous. If you go online, you can find all kinds of stuff. Not everything is accurate, okay? Because people have changed history. I know that sounds crazy. It's called revisionist history. So they take the parts they like and throw out the parts they don't, or they just change parts altogether to make it completely different and not what really happened, okay? So I found a lot of that when I was looking up Sherman's March to the Sea. So we're going to look into the surrender of Lee's army to Grant's army. We're going to look at the assassination of President Lincoln. I'm going to tell you some stuff you probably don't know. And that will be it. Then tomorrow is your test. Okay, I hope you're studying for it. And I hope you do really well. And then we're going to kind of look at all the generals that we have talked about today. I was sitting on my couch yesterday. My couch and my dining room are connected. One big room, yeah. And I was sitting there and I was looking at all these men that we have talked about. Because I remember telling you in 3rd grade that the amount of generals that were on our board to memorize was very tiny compared to all of the generals that really were there. And I know we still haven't done all the generals that were in the Civil War, but we've done a whole lot more of them. And I was looking over at the wall, just covered. I moved them all down because we're starting a new day. And I was just amazed to see all of these guys up there. There's so many of them, yeah? All right, so let's go ahead and begin. Are you ready? All right, here we go. So, oh, look, I'm not ready. My notes aren't on the right page. Okay, now I'm ready. All right, so we're looking at page 159 to 161, the end of chapter 7. And remember, we went all the way to the end of the book and then came back to chapter 7 because we want to make sure that we got to chapter 20 where it talks about Obama and all that. All right, your lifetime. It's pretty cool. In my history classes, we never got to my lifetime. So it's very exciting you got to your lifetime. All right, so here we go. Grant. So after the Battle of Chattanooga, Abraham Lincoln went, whoa, Grant is my guy. Let me grab Grant again. Ulysses S. Grant was named the general in charge of the entire Union Army. And Lincoln was hoping that Grant would be the guy who could finally defeat Robert E. Lee. Okay? That was his hope because remember, he's had a ton of generals. Yes? Just yesterday he had Burnside and Meade and Hooker. Yeah? So it's crazy the amount of generals he went through during this war. But the Army of the Potomac was only Robert E. Lee through the whole war. Remember yesterday we talked about after the Gettysburg defeat, Robert E. Lee went and said, hey, President Davis, I would like to resign. And Davis said, absolutely not. Okay? So President Davis said, no way. No way, Jose, you cannot resign, Mr. Lee. All right, so Mr. Lee continues, okay? So after the Battle of Chattanooga, like I said, Grant is put in charge. He is moved to the Eastern Front. So he grabs his buddy, William Tecumseh Sherman, and puts him in charge of the Western Front. Okay? We are going to be going back and forth between the Western and Eastern Front today because kind of they collide at this point in our history. And so we're kind of just going to go back and forth between the two. Okay? right, so let's begin. So I already did that part. So Grant and Sherman decide this is enough goofing around. We are going to declare total war, and we're going to end this thing. Okay? So Grant decides to march toward Petersburg. Okay? And Sherman decides to march toward Atlanta. Okay? All right, so the reason that Sherman is marching toward Atlanta is that Atlanta is another railroad hub, an important railroad hub that they want to take over, right? Because their idea is to continually deprive the South of the things that they need in order to fight the war so that they will surrender. That is the whole goal in life. Okay, remember? Take over the Mississippi, cut the South, and take over their supplies. And Grant's whole plan in life is to capture Richmond in hopes of ending the war. So, Sherman takes off to the south, to Atlanta. Remember, he's in that area anyway, because he's in the west, okay? And May through July, Sherman pushes his troops toward Atlanta, but it's not just like a free march. Yeah, there is a man standing in his way everywhere he can. Johnston. Yes, Joseph Johnston stands in Sherman's way every way he can. Now, unfortunately for Johnston, his military is small at this point in the war. And so he just they do this attack and run idea. So they kind of attack Sherman's army. Sherman's army comes back over them, overwhelms them, and they run away. And then they meet Sherman's army in another place, and they attack Sherman's army, and the same thing happens. Sherman's army overwhelms them, and Johnston's army runs away. So this happens over and over all the way to Atlanta. And in July, on the way to Atlanta, and in July, Johnston is replaced by Hood. John Bell Hood. Okay? And John Bell Hood tries to stop Sherman's army, because their whole goal in life is to stop Sherman from getting to Atlanta. They know where he's going. They know what his plans are. And they want to stop him from getting to Atlanta so that they can protect and defend their railroad supplying system. Does that make sense? All right. So all their efforts fail. And Sherman's army reaches Atlanta September 1st. Okay? September 1st, Atlanta is overrun. And what the Confederates do is the Confederates leave. Okay? So the Confederate army is on their way out. And what they've done is the Confederate army, because Sherman gets blamed for the whole thing, it's not true. The Confederate army decides that they are going to destroy anything that would be helpful to the Union Army, which is general normal warfare tactics. Everybody does it. Okay, remember when we read Gladys? They had the scorched earth policy when Japan was invading China, and China was told to burn anything that would be helpful to Japan, to put holes in their roofs and things like that. Remember that? Okay, so this has always been. That was World War II, which is way past this. But this has always been a tactic not to give comfort to the enemy. All right? So the Confederacy go through Atlanta, and they burn anything that they think would help the Union. All right? So every time I think about Atlanta burning, I think of this scene from Gone with the Wind, where Atlanta is burning. But when I looked at it to put it on for you guys, I'm like, yeah, no. Because it's not so much focused on the Atlanta burning as it is focused on the people who are trying to escape, the main characters of the story who are trying to escape Atlanta at this time. So I decided not to put it on. Okay? So So if you just want to go look at it, that's fine. But I decided not to do that. All right, so that is the beginning of Sherman's campaign of March to the Sea, which we'll talk about more later. Meanwhile, Grant is marching towards Petersburg. So May to June, see, same time frame. Shorter though, because, you know, they're kind of almost there. Grant marches his army towards Petersburg. So he decides, let me check my notes, that if he can take Petersburg, then the next step would be Richmond. Okay, so that's what he's thinking. So he marches towards Petersburg, he arrives there, and in May of 1864, he lays siege to Petersburg. Okay, now Richmond sees them surrender April 3rd of 1864, which to me seems like a really long time. So it's the dates that were in the book. They've been incorrect before. So hopefully these are correct. Usually when I catch it, I go check it, but I didn't check this one. So anyway, so according to the book, April 3rd of 1864, Petersburg surrenders to Grant, and Richmond goes, whoa, we're next. So Richmond goes through their town and burns anything that they think would be valuable to the Union, that would be helpful to them, so that the Union cannot use those supplies. Okay, so that is what they do. Sherman, we're going to move over to this board, so I'm going to pause you for a minute. All right, now you're unpaused. Okay, so Sherman's march to the sea, Sherman. Okay, so Sherman is out to crush the Confederacy. He is out to end the war. Remember, this war has been going on for really close to 4 years. Okay, it started in April of 1860. This is now April of 1864. When we ended with Petersburg and have come to the siege. Remember, this is September 1st. I don't know the year when Atlanta falls. I'm guessing it's 1863 is what it looks like to me. It should be on the timeline. Okay. All right. So Atlanta falls, and Sherman starts his march to the sea to crush the support for the Confederacy. So these are his goals with his march to the sea. He is going to crush support for the war, for the Confederacy. Yeah, supplies and how people feel about it can all be considered support. He is going to seize the supplies that he needs for his men along the way, which he does every single day. Okay? He is going to destroy the railroad ties. So the way that he destroys the railroad ties is that he heats up the ties and then bends them around trees. And they actually get a nickname called Sherman's bow ties. Okay? Where he gets the supplies are from the plantations. He goes in and sends a scouting group that go in, and it was usually a group of 50 men or so, and they would go and they would look for supplies that they needed. So they would look for food, and they would look for animals that they could slaughter and eat, you know, like chickens and turkeys and pigs and stuff. But Sherman had a lot of restrictions on his guys. So my son just read me like the Sherman order last night. So we were talking about the march to the sea. And so he would not allow his men to go inside the houses, was what his order said. They were supposed to leave enough food for the family that lived there. They weren't supposed to hurt anybody. They could say, hey, these are the things that we've taken, but it wasn't like an IOU, so the Union did not owe them money or anything at the end. So he had a lot of things. You couldn't hurt the houses. So he had a lot of restrictions on the men in his orders that were out to seize property, property not being houses, but being food and stuffs like that. Okay. And he had requirements of how many days of rations they had to have on hand at all times, and that they could take like horses and mules to replace the horses and mules that the Union lost along the way, because animals died just like people and plants and everything else. All right, because of a sin, yes. So God did not design the stuff to die, but because Adam and Eve sinned, sin entered the world, death entered the world. All right. So they were to replace those things, and that is what they did. Now, there's debate. Okay, lots of debate. Remember how I said people change history? Yeah. There's lots of debate on if his men actually followed those orders and stayed out of the houses. If, again, you watch Gone with the Wind, which is a depiction of the Confederacy side of things of the Civil War, and there's other stuff in it like romance and stuff too. But anyway, they have a Union soldier going into this house, and he's gonna like steal things and stuff out of the house. So that is depicted in that movie, but Sherman told them, no, do not be doing garbage like that. So don't know. I mean, he always sent the men out with an officer. The officer was supposed to keep law and order. So hopefully that did happen, but there's debate. Some people say, oh yeah, they were great, and other people say, no, they were horrible people, and they were doing this, and they were doing that, and they were burning down barns, and they were... So I don't really know, because I wasn't there. No, I wasn't born then. Okay. All right, so Sherman takes Atlanta. Before they leave, they look around at anything that could be helpful to the Confederacy, and they burn that part. Okay, so you have the Confederacy burning before they leave. You have the Union burning before they leave. So pretty much Atlanta is like burned. Okay, so as Sherman goes through Georgia, he does much, isn't really an accurate term, but he does burn things as he goes through Georgia. So he does burn anything that he thinks will be helpful to the Union. Okay, he looked at the entire South as rebels. He felt that they were all rebellious against the Union. He is there. He does say that he is not doing all-out warfare, because all-out warfare is also targeting civilians. And they didn't do that because he said that he was not out to punish the South or destroy the South. He was out to reunite the Union, which was Lincoln's goal all along. So he didn't go through to specifically hurt or destroy any civilian people, but he did give orders that if they were attacked by civilian populace, that his men were allowed to attack back and not just defend themselves, but just destroy the place. Okay, so if the Union Army came into your town, say you lived in Macon, Georgia. Yes, Macon, Georgia is a real place. You lived in Macon, Georgia, and the Union Army came in, and you just like sat there, and they took the food they needed and stuff, and nothing would happen to your town. If they came into Macon and you guys all got together and tried to attack the Union Army, then the Union Army would attack you. Does that make sense? So that was his orders anyway. All right. So civilians were always to be left alone. Now here's where that history thing gets in again. Okay. The width of the Union Army that ended up burning what they burned is a lot shorter than what a lot of books say. Okay, it's a lot narrower than what a lot of books say. Some books have it as much as 100 miles, which is ridiculous. There's no way. I think this book said 50 miles, which is still bigger than it was. Most historians believe it was between 5 and 15 miles wide that they walked and burnt things as they went. Anything that they felt would give comfort to the enemy. Okay, anything they felt that that the Confederacy could use to fight the Union. All right. Okay, so everything military was burned all through Georgia on his walk through Georgia. So he went from Atlanta, which is kind of like here in Georgia, to Savannah, which is on the coast. The Savannah surrendered December 21st, 1864, and Sherman sent a telegram to Lincoln saying, I present to you this Christmas present of Savannah. Okay, so Lincoln's excited because finally things are happening. Finally the war might be ending. I'm catching up with my notes, sorry. All right. So once he got to Savannah, Sherman heads north. Okay, so Georgia is right, there's Florida here like this, and then Georgia's right here. So he heads north, actually technically northeast, but that's okay. North to the Carolinas. His first destination is South Carolina. Now, South Carolina was the first state to secede, so there's actually a lot of animosity in the Union Army and Sherman's army toward South Carolina, toward Charleston and Columbus specifically, and Columbia, I was right the first time, sorry. Columbia is actually burned to the ground. Okay, so Sherman did say, don't do this. Nobody really knows if the Union Army burned it or if the Confederate Army burned it or if civilians burned it. Nobody really knows who ended up burning it, but the person who gets the credit for burning it is Sherman. Now, Sherman specifically said, look, gentlemen, this is not something that we want to be doing, just burning places. And he gave them orders not to burn Columbia, but if they follow those orders or not, it's just like when I give you an assignment or I tell you to do something or your parents tell you to do something. Maybe you follow it, maybe you don't, okay? So Sherman did tell them, don't do it. So they might have done it and not listened to him, or the Confederacy might have said, oh no, the Union's coming, and they might have burnt things, or the civilian population might have burnt things. No historian really knows for sure. A lot of people speculate and think, but nobody really knows who actually ended up burning Columbia. Okay. Crazy, right? Anyway, so once he is done with South Carolina, he takes over South Carolina. Basically, a lot of people called that the heart of the rebellion because South Carolina was the first state to secede, and they did go and get other states to say, come on, you want to come with us? You know you do. And so a lot of people considered them the heart of the rebellion. So the Union Army was very angry by the time they got there. They'd watched their buddies die for 4 years. So, and they blamed South Carolina for the whole mess. So either possibility is either one is possible. Either thought of who burnt Columbia is possible due to the fact that they were so upset, but doesn't give them the right to disobey the order that Sherman gave them. Yeah. And who knows? Nobody knows except the people who started the fire, and they're not telling. All right, so after that, he goes north to North Carolina, and Sherman warned the soldiers again, be kind, don't burn things, okay? Meanwhile, back in Virginia, Grant has taken over. Let me pause you. All right. Hi. It's just too wibbly when I move you around. I go, and I don't want you to get seasick. All right. So, Grant has captured Pittsburgh on April 3rd, 1865. And on April 9th, 1865, just a few days later, Lee surrenders to Grant. Okay, I just want to make sure I get everything. All right. So when Lee surrenders to Grant, so what's happened in the past when an army surrenders is that the army general takes everything they have. They take their sword, they humiliate the general, they like rip off his insignias and stuff. But Lincoln said, hey, you got to make sure you're kind. And Grant was going to be anyway. So all of the soldiers, all of the generals, all of Lee's army gets to keep their horses, their swords, their guns. Okay, Lincoln does not want them to starve because they were at war. He wants them to be able to shoot game, yeah, things that live out in the woods. To feed their families. He wants them to be able to plow their fields, so he leaves them their horses. So basically, it's a very amicable separation, surrender. Okay, and Lee tells his men that they should forgive, that they should rejoin the Union, that they should be loyal to the Union. And he surrenders and leaves. Now, Lee surrendering to Grant ends this conflict, but other armies have to surrender as well. It doesn't mean it's like the end of the war. It's kind of like the dominoes. So you push one and they all fall down, right? So this was the push one and they all start falling down. But it'll take a little time. Remember in the War of 1812? The greatest battle, which was New Orleans, that actually happened after the war was completely over. But people didn't know the war was over because of communication back then. There wasn't cell phones, email, even just regular phones, cars, no planes. So news traveled a lot slower than it does today. So it would take a while. So this is kind of the same thing. So unfortunately for the South, very unfortunately for the South, a person by the name of John Wilkes Booth decides to come up with this plan. Okay, he actually came up with the plan before Lee surrenders to Grant. His original plan is to kidnap the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. And he's going to kidnap him because he's going to trade him for Confederate prisoners of war. That's his plan. He gets a bunch of people together, and they all get together and they all go and they decide that they're going to kidnap him. They meet at the place in March. March of 1865, and they are there, but Lincoln ends up not showing up. Okay, so their plan is, so he starts a new plan. But by then, Lee has surrendered to Grant, and so his new plan is to assassinate the president. But the president wasn't the only target. Abraham Lincoln was not the only target. He was also going to assassinate the vice president, which was Andrew Jackson, and he was going to assassinate the Secretary of State, which was Seward. I had to think of his name. I always want to call him Sewell, and it's not right. It's Seward. Okay? So Seward is actually, okay, I'm sorry. John Wilkes Booth can't kill all these people himself. So he brings in other people to help him. All right? So those other people come to help him. It's sad. And so the guy who is supposed to assassinate Jackson at the last minute loses his nerve and walks away. Although they find him, they arrest him, and they hang him for the conspiracy to kill Lincoln. Then the guy who is supposed to get Seward, he actually goes to Seward's house because Seward had earlier his carriage that he rode in, because remember, they didn't have cars, they had carriages drawn by horses. It flipped over and he was injured, and so Seward was actually at his house in his bed, and the assassin comes in and stabs him but Seward ends up living. Seward doesn't actually die. So that man is also found hung and for the conspiracy, yeah, and the attempted murder of Seward. So the other guy on Booth's list was this man right here, Ulysses S. Grant. He was supposed to be at the theater with Lincoln that night. And so Booth and his buddy were going into the box and they were going to take out Lincoln and General Grant. That was their plan. Now, General Grant's wife said, nah, I don't want to go. And so he didn't end up going. So a different guy ended up coming with his girlfriend to the theater. And he was actually cut with a knife. Yeah. He was slit. Yeah. But he didn't get killed or anything. He just was cut. So that is the thing. There's a lot of that stuff that isn't really talked about. So what happens is the night is set. All these co-conspirators, which I already told you about, they do their thing or they don't do their thing. The way that the history is told for Andrew Jackson, I'm sorry. And did I say Jackson the whole time? I hope not. It's Johnson anyway. Oh my word. I hope not. It's Andrew Johnson is the vice principal. I mean the vice president. Oh my word. Okay. So if I said Jackson, that's wrong. Johnson. Okay. Oh my word. I hope I didn't say that. It's a slip of the tongue if I did. I'm so sorry. All right. So Andrew Johnson is the vice president. And so the guy who's supposed to kill Johnson actually sits in the alley waiting for Johnson to come by. And as Johnson approaches, he can't do it. He can't do it. He was going to actually shoot Johnson. He can't do it and he runs away. Okay, that's the way the history goes anyway. Man, I hope I didn't say that. All right. Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson, I know. They're very close, and sometimes I accidentally say the wrong name. So it's Johnson. Like my name, Johnson. Okay. So the whole conspiracy comes together, or not, in the case of Johnson. The reason that Booth chose these three men was because he was hoping to put the Union into chaos and that the South would rise again. That was his whole thing. The South will rise again. And it wasn't just his mantra. There were others, too, that would say the South will rise again. But what happens when Lincoln dies? The Vice President, Johnson, takes over, right? But if he dies, then the Secretary of State takes over, which was Seward. Okay, but since all of them were dead, then who would take over? And people would be all like, ah! And so that was his plan. All right. And he just didn't like Grant at all. He thought he was a bum. All right. So Booth charges into Lincoln's box at Ford Theater where they're watching this funny play. He shoots Lincoln. The military guy gets cut. Booth jumps out of the box, but because he has stirrups on, one of the stirrups catches a flag because they had draped flags around the presidential box, and he doesn't land very well. So when he lands on the floor, he breaks his leg. Okay. Because he landed badly. So he goes limping out. And at first, the people of the theater thought this was part of the act. They didn't even, go, oh, no, what's happening? Until Mary Todd Lincoln yelled and screamed, basically. She went, ah, yeah. Then they figured out that it was a problem. So there was actually a doctor seeing the play at that time. So he ran up into Lincoln's box. He wrapped what he could and grabbed a whole bunch of men, and they took him across the street to a boarding house and put him in the bed. And as they're examining the wound, they're like, yeah, he's not going to make it. And so he doesn't. He dies the next morning. Okay, so the people in the North are livid. They're so angry. And so Union troops go out to hunt John Wilkes Booth. It's not like nobody knew who he was. He was a famous actor of the time. So it'd be, think of a famous actor right now. It'd be like if they went and assassinated somebody. Okay, everybody would know who they were and everybody would be looking for them. It's the same kind of idea. So the troops hunt Booth down at this barn. And they're like, hey, come out or we're going to set the barn on fire. So I think his other guy's name was David. But the other guy comes out because Booth and his buddy had escaped on horseback, which is why he had the spurs on, because you put the spurs in to make the horse go faster. So the buddy comes out, but Booth won't come out. Booth stays in. So they light the barn on fire. Then they end up shooting Booth. Okay, he comes out, and they question him for a while to see who else was involved or what other information. That's how they found out about the whole conspiracy to kill all these people and all that. And then Booth dies from his gunshot wound. Okay. Oh, why does that not sound right? Yeah, they don't hang him. So they hang everybody involved. So they used to meet at this woman's boarding house to discuss the plot. They hung her. There was even somebody who wasn't involved, but they didn't hang him. They put him in jail. So he was, his name was Dr. Mudd, M-U-D-D, and he fixed Booth's leg, because on their way out, they actually stopped at a doctor to fix his leg. Well, set it, put it in like a cast kind of idea. But they didn't have cast back then, but that kind of idea. So they put him in jail because he should have reported Booth. Eventually they let him out. But the reason that I say that this assassination was so bad for the South was because Abraham Lincoln was always just going to kind of bring the South back in to the Union. He did not want to penalize them. He did not want to make them, have to pay back anything, no restitution. He was just going to bring them back. And once he got killed, all of the congressmen and senators were very angry with the South, and they levied huge taxes on the South because they wanted the South to pay for the whole war. It was just really bad stuff. Okay, so it was really hard for the South to recover, because John Wilkes Booth went and killed basically the greatest advocate for the South. All right, so that's what happened. I know it's really long, isn't it? But after the surrender and the assassination, they also go and get this man. Okay, they go and grab Jefferson Davis and put him in jail for treason. So they don't put Robert E. Lee in jail, but they take all his land, okay? And his land today is actually a national cemetery. All of the land that is Arlington Cemetery all used to belong to Robert E. Lee. Basically, they let him keep the house and took everything else, okay? They did, like I said, they did all kinds of taxes against the plantation owners. People lost their houses. It was just not a good way to try to join the Union back together. And even to this day, there's bad feelings between Northerns and Southerns, and so it's still kind of an issue, especially depending on where in the South you go. If you have an accent in the North like me, some parts of the South are not as happy, to see you or whatever. And it's not everybody. It's like everything. It's not everybody. It's certain people, certain parts, stuff like that. All right? Okay. And okay. So, let's take a quick look at all these generals that we have. All right? There's a lot of them. So this is Chamberlain, remember? Gettysburg. This is Ewell. Okay. I'm going to try to remember which ones are Union and which ones are Confederate. Some of them I'm not that familiar with. Rosecrans. Bragg. My son said when I looked it up, Bragg's, it was wrong. It's Bragg. Hooker. Burnside. Ambrose. McClellan. He's not bigger because he's more important. He's just, when I asked my husband to print it off, he thought I meant like full things. Like, no. This is PGT Beauregard. PGT is his initials. See if I get the Confederacy and the Union correct. This is Meade. Remember Gettysburg. Here, we'll just go like that. Meade. This is Irving. Uh-oh. I don't remember which side Irving was, so I'll put him in the middle. I can't remember. He was a while ago. Sorry. Okay. This is Hancock. Farragut. He wasn't a general. He was an admiral. Remember, he went up into New Orleans. Okay. Jeb Stuart. Fun fact, Jeb is not his name. It's his initials, J.E.B. J.E.B. Stuart. He is this side. Confederate side. Pope. Union. Winfield Scott. James Longstreet. Oops. Yeah, I was right to begin with. Confederate. Here. Oh, I'm sorry. Can't you see? Him you can't see. Alright, so I'll put him over here. George McClellan. Alright. This is Pickett. Confederacy. This is Thomas Jackson. Confederacy. Thomas. His last name was Thomas. Union. Okay. And William Tecumseh Sherman, also Union. I feel like Irving was Union, but I can't remember. So again, I'm not going to commit him to either side because I can't remember. My fault. All right, so as you can see, many men. And who are we missing on here? We're missing Abraham Lincoln. I never put his picture up, although I do have his picture. But you guys all know what he looks like, so I didn't put him up. All right, so this is our generals, and I'm going to let you go. And please follow the directions for today, okay? Bye.